Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. This morning, Arun Jaitley presented the first budget by the Narendra Modi government. It was a widely anticipated event and expectations were enormously high. By the time he ended, the stock market had almost risen 500 points. But 3 hours later, it sank into negative territory. So has the budget lived up to expectations, or is it disappointing? Does it have a clear direction and message, or was it just a mass of detail without a big idea? And where does it stand on issues like the fiscal deficit, growth, reforms, and personal taxation? Those are the questions we shall answer over the next 1.5 hours. Later, I shall have 4 top politicians from the 4 big parties for a political debate. But first, what do economists, industrialists, bankers, and editors make of Mr. Jaitley's maiden efforts? And now joining me to discuss the first Modi budget is the Joint Managing Director of Hero MotoCorp, Sunil Munjal, the Chairperson, India and Director, Asia Pacific of HSBC Bank, Naina Lal Kidwai, former Economic Advisor to the Finance Minister, Subhashish Gangopadhyay, and the Chairman of the Business Standard, T.N. Nayanan. Let me begin by asking each of the 4 of you for your broad general impression of the budget without going into specifics. And then after you've done that and set the scene, I'll come to specifics. First, T.N. Nayanan, in your eyes, a good budget, a disappointing budget, or just a middle-of-the-road performance?
Not disappointing, not middle of the road. Whether it's a good budget or not, Karan, will depend on whether the optimistic assumptions underpinning the budget are valid. Because he is spreading a lot of goodies around, and the question is, how is he managing to pay for them? And the answer is that he's assumed enormous tax buoyancy. He's assumed a lot of record levels of disinvestment. So he's assumed that that money will come. It'll happen only if the economic tempo picks up significantly. Otherwise, it won't happen. And then the arithmetic will come unstuck.
Sunil Munjal, one of the criticisms made of the budget today is that it was a lot of detail on a lot of different issues, but perhaps it lacked a central key big idea. In your eyes, is that a fair criticism or is it an unfair one?
For one, Karan, I think it's the longest budget speech I've heard in a very long time. And he also covered a very, very wide spectrum of issues. Literally almost every aspect of Indian life an Indian citizen got covered. Industry, agriculture, civil society, literally everyone is covered in there. I think the broad theme which came through was about what they had been talking about pre the elections as a part of the manifesto, that we will focus on stability of policy, that we will focus on growth. So I think they've tried to show growth all around, whether it's infrastructure or it's in industry or it's looking at the financial services industry, also looking at some things to do with the apprenticeship schemes and labor laws, etc. So there was no one single big bang announcement, but if you put them together, it's actually pretty significant.
Okay.
And I completely agree with Nayanan. The key here is going to be on implementation and ability to execute all of these things.
Naina Lal Kidwai, right at the very beginning when he began his budget speech, the finance minister said India unhesitatingly desires to grow. He also said slow decision making leads to loss of opportunity. Do you believe those thoughts infused the rest of the budget? Or do you think somehow as the budget carried on, they got forgotten and left behind?
I think those are very important underpinnings right through the budget. And the fact that there is not just growth that is central to it, and we see it in all the messaging across sectors that he touches on, but also a firm belief that they will execute on this. And I think to the extent that there are many small parts, but all, as was mentioned quite rightly by Sunil, that all add up to a big whole, it's important because if there was one big bold idea, we would question it on execution. If there are a number of small ways of getting there, it's probably easier. But like with anything we've always done in the country, it is going to be about delivery around the execution. I would bet on the fact that they can see a lot of this through. The tax buoyancy, of course, is dependent on growth itself. But yes, disinvestment at a time when the markets are up and the appetite for India is strong is clearly a good way to go. And I am certainly hopeful that a 63,000 crore number, which is what I think it comes to, it can indeed be achieved, provided we get underway right away.
Let's come to specifics later. Let's stick to broad general views. I'll come to specifics one by one so the audience can follow them with greater ease. Subhashish Gangopadhyay, there's another criticism of the budget that perhaps it spent too much time on little things, 50 crore here, another 100 crore there, and in the process, the attitudinal direction or the broad policy direction at the beginning thereafter got drowned out. Do you think this budget suffers from what I might call bad communication? A speech that could have been better written and perhaps failed to carry impact because it wasn't better written?
Well, if the finance minister has written his own budget speech, I think he needs to hire somebody to write it for him. And if somebody else had written it, I think he needs to be replaced. I think that the budget as a whole, I think, is a good budget, provided we make the assumption that everything that he has talked about is going to be delivered. Because remember, a lot of the assumptions that were made in the budget regards good governance, making it easier to do business, implementing all the things that he has said, which does not require any resources, but requires good governance. Now, if all of those things are done, I think the budget is good. Otherwise, I think it would just be another mediocre budget.
All right, let's now come to, in fact, specifics, and let's start, Nayan, with the fiscal deficit. He's accepted Mr. Chidambaram's target of 4.1%. Many people have applauded him for taking on that challenge, but would you agree that to be able to deliver 4.1, he's banking A, on growth, and B, on the monsoon, and C, on what the Iraq situation does to oil, and two of those, the monsoon and oil, are outside his control. So maybe he couldn't deliver if he even wants to.
Well, the monsoon is an element in whether growth will happen. It is an optimistic assumption that the economy will do much better. And I think if I understand the strategy, it is to make people feel better all around. Companies, investors, stock market players, ordinary taxpayers, make people feel better, make them spend, make them save, make people invest, and that will generate the growth, which will give you then the budgetary numbers.
So are you saying the 4.1% target which is accepted is part of the feel-good element of the budget? It makes people think he's getting a hard break on it.
The 4.1 is finally a derived element from everything else. But if the rest of it happens, then you'll get 4.1. If it doesn't happen, you won't get 4.1.
Now, in fact, Sunil Munjal, one of the critical factors in that 4.1 figure is an overall disinvestment target of 63,400 crores, which is both disinvestment as well as the sale of non-PSU things. Do you believe that is achievable, A, in 8 months, and B, in that particular period where perhaps big buyers may try and squeeze him out?
If the markets in India continue as they are, and the impression about India outside is the way it looks like now, I think 60 to 80,000 crores is possible to achieve, which would still be the highest we've ever done. But the markets have not been like this for a very long time. But it is a real possibility.
Translate for me the fact that you had two ifs in that answer. Are you saying this is a calculated gamble worth taking, or are you saying it's a risky gamble?
No, I'm saying a higher number than what he's announced is possible, Karan. He said 43,000 and 20,000 crores. I'm saying between 60 to 80,000 crores is possible if the markets continue like this.
So you have no real problem then with that?
So if they start off right away, I think this number is certainly achievable.
Which means also that you believe the 4.1% fiscal target looks reasonable and achievable, even though he calls it a challenge himself.
It is a challenge, by the way, and that's also why I think he's announced the Expenditure Commission to not just focus on this year, but how do you manage government expenditure better in coming years as well?
Okay. In fact, that's the very thing I want to go to.
And I think that's a smart move.
The target hereafter is 3.6% next year and 3% the year after. And that is critically dependent upon the Expenditure Management Commission reducing subsidies. And then although he said that we cannot live beyond our means, and he's talked about the better targeting of food and petrol subsidies, do you believe that Management Commission will actually do the job of reducing subsidies and therefore make 3.6 and 3% achievable fiscal deficit targets? Or do you think there the question marks grow bigger and perhaps a bit more worrying?
But Karan, don't forget the 3.6 and 3 can also come from good growth and GST and some of the other aspects that raise revenue, not just expenditure. But to answer your question on expenditure, clearly we have already seen action towards fuel subsidies being lifted. So that direction has been set, and it is going to be one which is happening in small amounts at a time so that it makes it more digestible. The area of fertilizer subsidy has been opened up, and I've certainly heard from some of my friends in the fertilizer sector that looking at the whole urea policy is a very refreshing first and the right way to go. So there's a positive there. I think we have to look at the Expenditure Commission beyond just subsidies. The idea, I think, will also be to look at how we spend money under food security bill, under NREGA and other expenditure bills in terms of determining how the money is spent, not just the amount, but is it going where it should, and how can that be improved?
Okay.
And therein may lie some savings for us as well.
Subhashish Gangopadhyay, I'm a little intrigued by the very idea of creating an expenditure management commission, because whether it's going to look at subsidies alone or whether it looks at how other monies are spent like in NREGA, surely those are political decisions that a government with 282 MPs and a clear majority should take on its own. Why does the finance minister need to create a management commission unless he wants to give himself protective cover, and he's therefore suggesting that despite the 282, this government hasn't got the political will to take tough decisions on expenditure and subsidies?
Well, one part of the expenditure management will obviously be to cut down expenditures. But the other part of expenditure management, especially subsidy management, is how are they distributed. Remember, close to probably in certain areas 50% of the subsidies are wasted. So if they can if the Expenditure Management Commission can come out with ways of better distributing the subsidies, then a lot can be saved without affecting the intended beneficiaries. So I sincerely hope that the Expenditure Management Commission looks into that specific task of ensuring that less leakages, less corruption, and these are not, political issues.
Okay.
This requires will, and if we do not address the leakages that are taking place, I don't think we'll be able to contain expenditure management, because that's the way to keep it outside the political ambit. Just manage it better.
I want to put that same question to you. Do you accept the question I asked, that there's a certain element of passing the buck when you appoint an expenditure management commission, or do you think, given the politics of India, it's the only way you can tackle expenditure and subsidies?
Karan, it's a good question. And my reading of it is that he did not want to do it this year. So he's found an excuse for pushing it back, because he did not want this budget to have any negative elements which would invite criticism. You must remember that they raised the rail fares and got this huge amount of flack. And they are facing state elections in key states in 4 months. They want to win those states. They don't want to do anything now which will lose them votes.
So this is clever.
He's just bought time with his nonsense about a commission. You don't need a commission to know how to fix subsidies.
Absolutely. If you've got the will, you can do it yourself.
He didn't want to do it. He wanted to kick the ball down the road, and he wants to win some state elections, and he'll do it after that.
Is there any assurance in your mind that he will do it after that?
If they want to go through with the big investment plans they have to cut subsidies.
So at the end of the day, circumstances will force him.
There's no choice. Otherwise they can't do the investment. It's like you saw in the railway budget. Big investment plans, no money. So you say PPP, FDI, it's all...
But what you're also saying is that if they really want to do big growth and they have plans, then they can't keep kicking it down the road. You can kick it down once, but that's it. That's a yes, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
Let's come, Sunil Munjal, to the retrospective taxation issue. Now here, there was a lot of expectation that he might repeal the Pranab Mukherjee amendment, or at least announce that it will be prospective, not retrospective, but none of that has happened. Which means that as far as companies like Vodafone, and by the way, Vodafone is not the only company, I'm told there could be somewhere between 12 and 15 other companies. As far as all of those companies are concerned,
correct,
the court cases will continue. And the resolution will come through arbitration or the court cases, not through anything the government chooses to take an initiative over. Is that sending a reassuring message to foreign investors who are waiting for some good outcome here? Or has he missed an opportunity and sent the wrong message?
So what's reassuring is the message that there will not be retrospective amendments in the future. But it is short of expectations, because people had expected that they would actually try and fix the earlier ones as well. So I think their expectations have not been met, but in future he said very clearly this will not be the way we do business.
So are you also saying that he's lost an opportunity to
He also talked to one, I think he also talked to one more thing, this one-time settlement thing. I'm not quite clear what he was referring to. Was he talking of disputes existing right now? Or is it some kind of a voluntary disclosure which is opening up a window for, to say you can go and create a one-time settlement?
That's true. That's you're right to point it out, but since neither you nor I have an answer, let's park that and leave it aside. But coming back briefly to Vodafone and those other 12, 15 companies, do you think he's missed an opportunity? A quick answer to that?
Yes, but not enough to worry the rest of the world now, because he's saying we will not do it again.
Well, I want to pick up on that point, Naina Lal Kadwai, whether you really believe he said we won't do it again. There's no doubt that in his interviews he's actually said he won't do it again. But the truth is, at the same time, he's created a committee to be set up by the CBDT, which will actually go into precisely such issues. So all it means is that the next time an assessing officer wants to issue a retrospective tax demand, he can't do it directly. It has to go via the CBDT committee. But there's no guarantee the CBDT committee will say no. So actually, despite the fact he's saying there won't be further retrospective demands, the door has been left open for there to be. So once again, how reassuring is the overall message on retrospective tax?
I think a lot depends on what the constitution of this committee looks like and how it actually carries forward its duties. So Karan, you're right, there is the risk, but I would like to believe that the process is such now that it is not left to individual officers, that you take the more sort of tricky issue of transfer pricing, and a lot of the cases really are around transfer pricing. There is a very technical area in terms of how you determine the price, because there's a discounted cash flow method, there are serious assumptions there, and one of the big issues has been on what basis has a price been arrived at by the tax officer. Okay. And some of the assumptions are quite ridiculous, in fact. So if it's a technical area such as this, better to have a committee which understands the issue, opines that it is correct or not before you raise the demand, rather than raising the demand and then having to go down the track of litigation.
Okay.
I think it will serve the purpose of cutting down litigation down the line.
Let me stop you there and bring in Nainan, because while you were answering and saying that you would like to believe that in fact the committee will take the right decision, Nainan was nodding his head, and I got the feeling you were nodding in disagreement. Do you actually agree with my initial question, that although the finance minister is saying he's stopped and there will be no further fresh retrospective tax demands, he's actually created a window that permits it, although that window is a committee rather than an individual assessing officer?
Karan, you have to see that all the chatter before the budget about retrospective tax was completely off the mark. There is no government that can rule out retrospective taxation. It is done by every government in the world. As Mr. Jaitley made absolutely clear, he cannot take away the right of Parliament to legislate, including legislate retrospectively. It is a supreme body. You cannot take it away. What he has done is going up to the limit of what he can do, which is to put safeguards, processes in place, and to declare that his government will not do it. But he cannot commit on behalf of all future governments. And as for existing cases, what can he do? There's a process on. He's saying that the process continue.
Well, why could he not have it? I'm going to put this to Shubhashish
And people
Gangopadhyay.
simply expected an unrealistic thing out of a finance minister on this issue.
Well, you're hearing Shubhashish Gangopadhyay, TN9, and say that people's expectations were unrealistic. The speculation was actually unrealistic. I'm talking about the speculation in the pink papers, including, believe it or not, Nainan's own paper. But why could the finance minister not have said, that in fact I'm going to pass an amendment, just as Pranab Mukherjee did 2 years ago, that will ensure that the application of that amendment will be prospective and not retrospective. He had the capacity and power to do it, and he could have done it easily in the budget. Why could he not have done that?
No, I think you must listen carefully to what Nainan said. Indeed, this is the sovereign right of the country to decide how to do the taxation. I think the important thing is that he broke it up into two parts. He said that those which are already under litigation or being discussed, let us try and resolve them in their own way, and I'm sure that he's going to try out of court resolutions. And in the others, he said that I make a commitment that I'm not going to do this again, right? But the important thing to understand is that once these things are resolved, then they set up a precedent how other things will be done. Okay. And therefore that in itself will limit the ability of the Commission to go back and start making demands retrospectively. So I think what he has done is the right way to go about it, that those which are already under litigation, settle them in a way that sets a precedent for the future, and at the same time make a commitment that such futures would be limited.
All right, let's move on. Sunil Munjal, two areas where in fact FDI caps have been raised, and both were in a sense anticipated and even wanted, is defense and insurance. They've both gone up to 49%. Now, is this going to send a message to international investors in particular that the new management of the Indian economy, the new managers are opening the doors, this is now becoming an inviting country? And do you see that being a condition that will change the way the world outside views India?
Well, as far as insurance is concerned, I think the insurance industry is very happy with this. On the defense, however, what some of the major global companies are saying is that if we have to pass on core IP into India, we need to own more than 49%. We need to have control over these companies, at least have the ability to own 51%. So there I think we may have fallen a little bit short, because the expectation was we will raise it over 50%, but with some conditionalities that these companies would actually have technology coming in, and these companies would also export out of India, not just supply within this country.
So you believe that as far as FDI and defense is concerned, this is falling short and disappointing? A quick yes.
Yeah, I think we've fallen short, but I think we've not finished the journey. I think we've just started this.
All right, that obviously is a hope rather than a guarantee, but you may well be right. Nenalal Kudai, when it comes to GST, which everyone uniformly seems to believe is going to be very important, it will add significantly to GDP growth, the finance minister on the one hand said that negotiation and the constitutional amendments will be ready and in place by the end of this year, and the finance secretary repeated that subsequently in interviews. But the finance minister hasn't set a start-up date. So do you feel by failing to set a start-up date, he's actually showing he doesn't have full confidence in completing the amendments? Because if he has confidence, he would have set the date.
Karan, my initial read was exactly yours, that it's disappointing that he didn't set a date. But I saw the interview subsequently, at least of the finance secretary, where apparently it has been stated that he will actually introduce it in the winter session of Parliament, which is right now. So it could suggest that we would have GST in the near future. So yes, he didn't set a date, disappointingly, but on the other hand, if the intention is to put it in at the winter session itself, it's probably going to be earlier than we had all hoped.
But then why do you think he didn't set a date? Because the winter session starts end of November, early December, and if he's succeeding in passing the constitutional amendment, he could have easily said GST will start 1st April 2015. And that would have got him a lot of kudos, but he deliberately didn't do it. Was it just unnecessary caution on his part then?
I don't know what's holding him back. I understand that there are still a couple of issues he's looking to resolve, so he would be the best judge of that. But, you know, from my perspective, the fact that it is on track and he has been quite confident about seeing it forward. He's, in fact, one of the first things he did after taking over was to engage with the states on the subject. Okay. Tells me that there is a degree of seriousness to seeing this through, and it's particularly significant because we know that one of the reasons GST didn't happen earlier was because there was resistance from the BJP or at least some of the BJP states.
Okay.
So the statement now saying that BJP is good and they're moving forward is, I think, music to our ears.
Now, Subhashish Gangopadhyay, right at the very beginning when he was giving attitudinal direction or broad policy direction to his budget, one of the things he said was that the budget was the most comprehensive action plan, suggesting that this budget would be an indicator of things that the government would do, even if it couldn't actually do them now, but an indication of what's to follow. And yet, nothing was said in the budget about labour law reform, about the land acquisition amendments, and both of those are things that this government is committed to doing. One is a manifesto commitment, the other is Mr. Gadkari's commitments in the press. Nor anything about coal denationalisation. Once again, do you think he's missed an opportunity by not at least talking about these things?
Well, as I said, when I started, that the budget could have been better written. But remember that these are extremely, extremely sensitive issues, and they have to be taken up together. The mistake we make is that we think that the land acquisition issue is different from, the labor issue is different from the bankruptcy issue. These all have to be looked at together. And in that sense, the budget is not the place where this can be done. This has to be done by the ministries coming together with good leadership to be able to come up with an extremely consistent mechanism which will keep everybody happy, because this is a process by which you create more for everybody. If you start looking at the adversarial relationships, which is what is happening when we talk about labor laws, when we talk of land acquisition, that problem has to be solved first. There is no point talking about it in the budget, because it requires a much, much bigger effort to be able to get everybody on one side.
You've heard what Subhashish Gangopadhyay has said, and yet there were many people who were hoping, many people writing in newspapers who were expecting that there would be some announcements, directional announcements about labour laws, about land acquisition. Was that something you looked for and found missing, or do you accept Subhashish's point that the budget was the wrong place and people were mistaken in thinking this would be an opportunity to make announcements?
It doesn't necessarily have to be. These are not essentially budget issues. You mustn't forget that the BJP voted for the Land Act. So they will have to do some...
Yet Gadkari's been meeting ministers to find out how to amend it.
Yes, but I think they'll have to move carefully. The labour thing also, my reading of it politically is that they don't want to get people's hackles up on any issue just now. They don't want the opposition to get hyperactive and respond to specific policy initiatives. They want to try and keep things going and get people happy, get momentum going, and then address some of these issues. That is my understanding of where they're trying to reach.
So he's walking a tightrope between wanting to give direction in clear terms to invigorate the market, and yet
it's clear that they want to change
and not make people unhappy.
Yeah, it's clear that they want to change labor policy, but their own trade unions will object. So they have to do it carefully.
So we have to be understanding of the tough balancing act he has to follow.
To some degree. But you have to look for whether there's a strategy to get there or not.